Okay, so we are live. Hello there. Today we are going to talk about the displacement in Guerilla. So it shouldn't be too long of a video, I guess, this time, because the subject is a bit simpler, I guess, than the fur I had to talk about previous time. So let's get started with a sphere, because everything starts with a sphere, or a plane, or a cube. So displacement. If we want to apply displacement onto an object, we'll need two things, a shader, a displacement shader, and a subdivision. So if I want to put a basic displacement on my sphere, I can just click drag it in my random graph to make a path for the sphere. And we can add by control spacebar clicking the displacement shader. And the displacement shader is a shader which apply only to displacement, because the mode is in set displacement by default. Sorry, my cat wants to go out. So yes, we are in set displacement by default, and the shader is a displacement. So this is a shader, and it needs some information, some different information to map the displacement. So the first thing you want to map on a displacement is the amount of displacement you want to get. So to start, just let's plug a cloud into our displacement amount. And we're going to jump right to raw mode for the normalization. We'll come back to that later. And we'll plug that onto our setup. So for now, I've just applied cloud texture, procedural texture into the amount of my displacement. And I just switch to raw. If I start a render now, not much happened. You see that the normals get broken a little bit. So if I just decrease the scale of my cloud, you'll see that maybe a bit more clearly. So you see that by default there is no displacement happening right now, but just bump. So if we take a look at any object in our scenes, you can see that there is subdivision attributes on our objects, and there is also some displacement attributes. So to modify them and to make them do the thing we want, we are going to add an attribute node. Most of the time I separate the displacement from the attributes, just so I can modify the one without affecting the other. You could totally apply the thing that I'm doing now in the attribute shader on the displacement node, but I usually separate them. So now that I have a displacement shader activated, I can go to my attributes, and I want to add some subdivisions. So I'm going to start with maybe just two divisions on my object, and I'm going to say that the subdivision are smoothing the object actually. So I could just add subdivision without smoothing the object, but now I'm subdividing and smoothing the object at the same time. And if we go into the tab of displacement, you can see that for now I'm just in bump mode. So Guerilla is using the displacement information to offset the normal of the object to fake the detail. But if we go to displacement mode or displacement plus bump, he's gonna displace the object. So for now the amount is very big, and you can see that I have a cropping box around my object. This is because I need to tell Guerilla that there is some displacement amount on my object, and I need to extend the bounding box of my object to fit the object. So it's an optimization, I guess, for casting rays faster. Now we need to indicate to Guerilla that he has to search further around the object to extend the bounding box and catch the rays. Correct me if I'm wrong. James' cat is not confirmed. Yeah, my cat is moving more than me these days. Okay, so displacement plus bump. So it was just very basic introduction. You can see that there is also a displacement system attribute here that I can change. If I'm in object mode, the displacement amount will be depending on my object transform. So if I have some scale on my object, the displacement is going to scale accordingly to the scale of my object. So it's going to be multiplied by the scale of my object. If I jump to world mode, the displacement amount is going to be driven only by the scale or the multiplier of my displacement. I'm going to go back on this one to explain a little bit further. So if I'm in world mode, yeah, the displacement is just going to be based on that. It's not going to be taking into account the scale of the object. World object. Okay, let's cancel that. And we're going to open the displacement scene, I guess, to just look at a few examples of how you could use bump and displacement accordingly in Guerilla. So this was a quick intro. So if you go to help samples, bump, normal, and displacement, there is sample scenes with some crab claws. It's not claw. I don't know how you say that in English. Okay, so there is different setup here that we're going to take a look at now. So if I click on my first object, you can see that I have a setup for using bump using displacement. So it's actually basically the first example I've shown you where I have a displacement shader, but the displacement mode is just set to bump. So here, if you take a look closely, I don't have any actual displacement happening on my object. It's just normal bump, which is based on my displacement shader. So here, yeah, just have a displacement shader, which is actually normalization type row. So let's talk a little bit about the normalization here, or maybe I can just go back to my sphere a little bit to show a bit better what this does. Actually, no, I'm gonna continue with my crap. Sorry. Maybe I'm gonna talk about normalization on the actual displacement setup. So second object is real displacement. So this one is a displacement shader, using a displacement shader in raw mode. So if I just uncheck that, I have a texture for my displacement, which is a displacement exported from ZBrush, and it's a raw file. So the actual displacement values are absolute. So if there is a hole to make in displacement, it will have negative values, and if there is bumps, it's going to be positive values, and the values are going to be exactly the amount of displacement that should happen. It's where I'm using the normalization type raw. So when you are in raw normalization type, Guerilla is just going to take the values straight out of your texture and apply them as a displacement to the object. So these attributes are not going to affect anymore your object. I could on this one change the offset or the multiplier. It wouldn't change anything. There is another mode if you want to these parameters to affect your displacement, is the affine mode. So with this one, if I wanted to put an offset on my object, let me reduce a little bit the subdivision just to make faster examples. So here, if I jump to this affine mode, I can apply an offset to my map before displacement happens. It's good when you have a map which has been offsetted with a 0 at 0.5 offset. So most of the time, ZBrush by default exports maps with an offset of 0.5. So it can be the way to remap it. But most of the time, honestly, I just use raw mode. And if I want to make any modification to my texture, I can still here in the range attribute of the texture change my input min max and output min max. For example, if I had a map which were with a 0.5 offset in ZBrush, I could just do a minus 0.5 here to remap my texture to the actual range I want, and it could be working as a raw mode for the displacement. So the normalized mode is another mode, I guess, when you were using some non-floating point values on displacement, like more grayscale maps. And if you want to see what it's doing exactly, you can go on the documentation, and you can see the different mode for displacement. Oops, sorry, the displacement modes, normalization mode. Sorry, where was it? Displacement mode. Amount. Okay, here, normalization. So honestly, I never use the normalize. I always use the pure absolute raw mode for displacement. I prefer to know what values I'm dealing with. So this second example, yeah, is just in substance. Is substance in the case of normalized? Well, if you export a map from substance, it depends if you export it as an EXR, and you can use it, I guess, as a raw mode. I've never actually exported a displacement map from substance, so I'm not sure. But if the values are absolute and floating, I guess you can stick with the raw mode. But if you have made any test, you can tell me. Okay, so here you can see that I'm going full displacement. So on my attributes node, I've chosen the only displacement. So displacement plus bump is actually the next example, where I don't need to put the real amount of geometry to have the same visual detail, kind of. So here what I'm doing is I'm just subdividing the object until I have enough polygon to describe the detail which are inside of my displacement map. But it can be very costly because I have to generate millions of polygons to reproduce the detail that I had in ZBrush. But when you talk about displacement, what is the main interest? I mean, you want to have little shadows, little cast shadows like that. You want to have disturbance in the outlines of your object. But the main central part, this one, is almost okay with the bump. So you don't need to actually subdivide your object all the way to the top and had so much subdivisions. That's why we have the next example, which is displacement plus bump, where I have the same displacement set to raw with the same texture from ZBrush. And in my attributes, you see that I'm subdividing only 3 times, and I've chosen the mode displacement plus bump. So what does it do? It look at the displacement and see the amount of detail that have been able to be transferred on the mesh based on the amount of subdivision you have, and the rest of the detail which have been too thin to express with the number of polygon you had are going to be expressed by bump mapping. So it's going to twist the normal to make it look like it's detailed, except even though you don't have so much polygon. So let me just show you the difference. So here is the displacement plus bump. Let me store the picture. And if I just go back to displacement only, and with the same amount of subdivision, you can see that I actually don't have that much detail. I mean, it's already quite detailed. Obviously, I have enough detail to cast shadows and make some perturbation on the outlines. But the tiny crisp details on the facing areas here are really brought by the bump. So this is for displacement plus bump. So I usually go with that most of the time. So you have also the bump using surface. What I should precise about how Guerilla make the decision of what to put in the bump and what to put in the displacement is, I guess, using a high-pass filter. So when you make a high-pass filter, you actually blur the map and make the difference with the original map to retain just the high-frequency details, and you put that in the bump. But during this process, you might lose a few details. I haven't noticed it personally, but you could have some examples where the bump is not detailed enough because of the high-pass filter happening on the displacement evaluation, and it's where you could actually use a bump map into the surface node to actually put a bump on top of the displacement. So here on this one, I have only a bump using the surface shader. So it's actually doing pretty much the same than the first example, which were using bump only with displacement. So you can see these ones are pretty similar. And here, if I take a look, I just have in a regular surface shader into the normal tab, I just have a bump map with the displacement map. So it does the same thing actually than the first example, but passing through a displacement, surface shader. So you could totally think of separating your high frequency detail from your low frequency detail. So you could make displacement with a low frequency detail map, and go for the high frequency detail into a surface shader bump, just to be sure that you're not going to lose any detail along the way. Okay, and the last example here is the normal map. So the normal map here is actually another way of expressing the details by offsetting the normal based on normal map. So where the bump is actually trying to make a filter on the map to decide which parts are higher than the others, and then decide how to change the normal. I guess the bump map is working like that. The normal map is actually baked in vectors, which are actually the numerical values for the normal to be offsetted. So you have no filters on this to actually decide the amount of distortion you're going to bring to your normals. So in some cases it might be more accurate to use a normal map than a bump map if you have a precise behavior to reproduce, for example, an object in ZBrush that you have sculpted, and you already know the shape that the normal should have. So I wanted to show a few other things which are not in this scene for now, and maybe we can add them later. Is that you can actually do the displacement without changing the normal, and using a normal map from ZBrush or from any other program that could generate a normal map to decide the shape of your normals. So let me copy the first part of my setup about the real displacement, and let me put it here. And I'll first just take a look at my other setup, and I will put okay, 4 subdivision is okay, just to be, or 5, just to be a bit faster. So let's take a look at that. So here normally it's just displacement, okay? And if you take a look at the displacement shader, there is a compute normal checkbox which is activated, and it actually recomputes the normal after the displacement process. So if I deactivate this option, you will see that actually the shape is going to be deformed, but the vertex will not re-evaluate their normals. So you actually have almost the same reaction that if you had not displaced your object, but you see that you have cast shadows, so the geometry is actually displaced, but the normal haven't been re-evaluated. And you can say that, okay, now that I have my proper geometry, I'm gonna feed it the normals from ZBrush. Okay, so now I have the displacement and the normal, which have been evaluated separately from a normal map. So I was able that way to dictate the way I wanted the normal to be, and the displacement separately. So it might happen sometimes if you have a lot of cut in your UVs or high stretching situation in your object, that you're gonna start to see the seams in the displacement plus bump way of doing the displacement and bump, and you might get some seams. But if you know already what the normal should be pointing, or which direction the normal should be pointing, you could force them to be evaluated by a normal map in the shader, and having the displacement just moving the point. So it's why you have this compute normals option on the displacement shader. So for displacement, I've just put some basic subshader here by plugging texture into the amount, but you can totally remove that and click drag the amount in your browser, and start to make subshaders for your displacement. So you could mix different displacement map, add them, subtract them, offset them, then put it into the amount as a raw displacement. So you can totally do that also in the displacement shaders. So it makes sense because in Guerilla you can do it in every mappable attribute, but I just wanted to recall you that can be convenient sometimes to blend the displacements. So I guess it makes a pretty decent coverage of what you could need inside a displacement shader. If If I forget something, tell me, or if you have any question, you can ask me. I have another kind of shader, displacement shader I want to show you in Guerilla. And I prepared a little surprise. It's not a big surprise, but for Guerilla fan, I guess it's a small surprise. So there is another type of displacement which is called vector displacement. So what displacement does for now, oops, I have some other stuff open in Photoshop, student works. So displacement actually just take a basic surface. Sorry, maybe I should stop the render here. No? Okay, so displacement is just taking a flat surface and can do some elevation at render time just based on the normal. So it can just make non-concave displacement. If you want to extrude a mushroom out of a plane, oh nice mushroom, you can't, because you can't have one vertex take two positions just with one map, you know. So this other type of displacement is called vector displacement, and it can create this kind of concave shapes by expressing the position of the sampled point of the geometry as a position in the world, so either in tangent space or either in world space. It can help you to produce more complex displacement. It's not very often used, but let me show you what you could do with that. And this is the little surprise. I just had a little fun yesterday night trying to do that with vector displacement. Let me can try to guess what's gonna appear here. So I let you a few seconds or minutes to guess. The first one to guess will have a special thanks. Oh, Christophe, you're too fast. I should have put the color on this. The Heben's face, yeah, would be great. Vector displacement surprise. Guerilla is rising from the stones. Okay, so here is a vector displacement. Yeah, Christophe, you broke the surprise. Let me put a bit more subdivision on this one. So here you can totally express from out from a single plane some much more complex shape. So you see here I have to crank up quite a lot the subdivision because I have to have enough points on the base of my plane to fill all this star. So this is vector displacement and what you can do with it. I don't see a lot of usage for that actually, but if you have to make a star raise from a plane, that's the way to do it. Or I guess there is many other better way in Houdinis, but if you just have displacement in your hand, you could do it like that. So how do you do that? Let me take a look at the ZBrush scene I've used to do that. Actually, it's quite of a nonsense because you never do that. But if I go down on this one, I actually started from a simple plane. I could have started from just one face, but I just had some subdivision on this one. But normally, if I just import back the geometry I started from, is this one, and this is actually the geometry I've used to generate the displacement map in ZBrush. So what I've done is I actually put a Guerilla star like that. So it's it's a basic star, and I've just slowly pushed my points around the star and used some projections to match to fit the star like that. It was a bit tricky, and it's actually pretty messy. If you see the in between step, the geometry is actually pretty dirty. But you see here in Guerilla, in ZBrush, I had to crank up 7 million polygons to do that. Okay, so kind of a nonsense, but when you have that, you can totally export a vector displacement map. So what you have to know in vector displacement is that it's expressed differently in every software. So in ZBrush, you have to go into the preference tabs and into the import export options, into the vector displacement maps. You have to choose the proper flip and switch values. So in most softwares, they don't tell which value you should use, but in Guerilla, because they are very kind, in the displacement, you can see that flip switch 3, it's written right on the options. So you just have to go into the preference, import, export, flip switch for the tangent one. You just have to put 3 in this option, and then you can just go either into the multi-map export, the Z plugin multi-map exporter, and go to the vector displacement export option, vector displacement map. You check the tangent mode. You of course export it as a 32-bit EXR, and when you do that, you have to go back to your 0 level and import the geometry you want to sample your displacement from. So I want my displacement to start from a plane, and so I had to re-import my plane before to do the export. And we are not going to do a ZBrush course today, but that's basically the way to export it. And voila, it's the kind of things you can do with displacement. So in ZBrush, you just have to know that, in Guerilla, the displacement shader is a different kind of displacement shader. It's a vector displacement shader. So when you create it, you just have to write vector displacement, and this one you just have to fill it with your map from ZBrush. If you have multi-UDIM, you can change the mode. And here on this one, you just need to crank up the subdivision up to the level you need to have enough mesh polygons to express your shape. Another thing you might have to know is that the bump plus displacement plus bump, I feel is not working very well with the vector displacement. Maybe it's not designed for working with a vector displacement. So if you go to the displacement here, you can see that I've just choose displacement and not displacement plus bump. Let me try again. I haven't tried with that much subdivision. Maybe it's working better now that I have more mesh, but he's gonna recompute now. But yes, vector displace usually work better with displacement only on your mesh. Okay, so it was pretty short. I guess we are under 30 minutes. See, I guess the high pass filter is not working the same on a vector map, which makes sense, I guess. So displacement only. And back to that. And let me just play a little bit with this one, just because it's fun. Oh, okay, just gonna reduce the subdivision. And if you have any questions, let me know. We can go back on any subject I might have covered a bit too fast or too blurry. Tell me. I don't know if I missed, but what does vector maps look like? Okay, let's take a look at the vector. They are funny looking. Oh, okay. Okay, this is a commercial. Okay, so vector displace is a kind of machine can understand that, but human have more difficulties, I guess. RGB is looking like that. So basically, they are actually coordinates of the vertex in space, I believe. It's just the coordinates of which place the vertex should be offset on the space. Any other question, maybe? Oops. So yeah, most of the time go for raw displacement, EXR maps, and you shouldn't have too much problems in Guerilla. Oh, okay, I think I've crashed my Guerilla. Okay, yeah, I don't know what I've changed, but Guerilla never crash. It's a Windows aberration. Okay, so if there is no more question, I guess I'm gonna hand the live for now. And do you try to mix displacement? If I mix displacement like vector plus normal displacement, or because when I mixed if I mix displacement, I usually do a subshader, so I could totally take a map from ZBrush for the low frequency detail, for example, and take a map from Substance and just add them together in a subshader. And yeah, it totally could work, ZBrush plus Substance. You just have to be careful to have their zero aligned before to combine them. So if you have a ZBrush map which his zero is at 0.5 and the Substance one is actually not offsetted, or the contrary, you would have to offset first the map from ZBrush to put it aligned to the zero, like a real raw data. Then you could have the Substance on top of it, and just plug that to the output of the shader. So if I just had to illustrate that for now, I would go inside of the amount shader. I would take two textures, one from ZBrush, one from Substance. Let's say that my ZBrush texture is actually needs an offset of 0.5. I would just do a subtract. So I would just take my texture and subtract 0.5 to put my ZBrush texture at the 0. And if this one is already correctly aligned, I could just combine them as an add operation, and the result of this could be the output for my amount of my displacement. Anyway, to subdivide object based on the distance from the camera. Yeah, okay, yeah, I wanted to talk about that. So there is no adaptive subdivision in Guerilla for now, so you couldn't do that actually in a dynamic way. You might do a trick, like, I don't know, if you're making your assembly on Maya, for example, or another set dressing package, you could maybe at the moment of the export run a camera path and put an attribute on the object that store their distance, and in Guerilla you could have different tag or path to grab the object which have different distance from the camera and get different subdivision, but it's not going to be a dynamic way of subdividing based on the camera position inside Guerilla. Actually, I don't believe there is such a thing for now in Guerilla, but we are asking it, I guess, often. Okay, don't hesitate if you have any other questions. Anyway, there is always the Discord channel is here if you have any question that pops later. We'll be happy to answer if there is any questions. So I guess I'm gonna end this live for now. And my gift, I say I will have a special thanks. Yeah, so a special thanks to Christophe for finding before even I start the the guessing work. That the surprise was a Guerilla logo, but he's so fan of Guerilla that he felt it right from the beginning. Okay, so see you everyone, and let's see in another live maybe. See you.